Fugitive cocaine lord Pablo Escobar.
Escobar, a ruthless killer.
A bloodthirsty gangster.
Killing 19 and injuring nearly 200.
Medellín, December 2nd, 1993. On a tiled rooftop in the Los Olivos neighborhood, a man runs out of breath. He's overweight, cornered, and holding a pistol that suddenly feels ceremonial. Moments later, a gunshot echoes across the red brick skyline. The myth says Pablo Escobar died because he was hunted down by elite police. The truth is colder. Escobar didn't lose because he ran out of money, guns, or fear. He lost because the world he built was too loud, too personal, and too centralized. He didn't just run a cartel, he tried to run a country. And countries don't tolerate competitors forever. This is the story of why Pablo Escobar failed, and what replaced him wasn't justice, but something far more efficient. From the beginning, Pablo Escobar didn't want to hide. That was his first and most dangerous deviation from the rules of organized crime. Wealth alone wasn't enough. He wanted recognition, visibility, acceptance. Unlike later traffickers who learned to stay invisible, operating quietly through intermediaries and shell structures, Escobar placed himself at the center of his empire. He ran for Congress, he gave interviews, he made himself a public figure, not just a rumor. In neighborhoods abandoned by the state, he built stadiums, housing projects, and public works with his name attached, ensuring that gratitude was personal and loyalty was visible. And when challenged, he didn't negotiate quietly. He declared war on the Colombian state openly. Bombings, assassinations, threats, nothing was subtle. Escobar wanted everyone to know who he was fighting and why. This wasn't recklessness, it was greed and ambition. Escobar wasn't content being rich. He wanted to be legitimate. He wanted the authority of the state without surrendering the power of crime. In his mind, popularity could substitute for legality, and money could buy moral standing. He believed that if enough people benefited from his wealth, the state would be forced to accept him as a political reality. That belief was his fatal mistake. By stepping into politics, Escobar transformed his criminal enterprise into something far more dangerous in the eyes of the government, a rival center of power. No longer just a trafficker to be regulated or quietly tolerated, he became a direct challenge to sovereignty itself. The state could no longer treat him as a law enforcement problem. It had to treat him as a competitor. Pablo Escobar reduced power to a single brutal equation, plata o plomo, silver or lead, accept the bribe or accept the bullet. There were no exceptions. Judges, police officers, journalists, politicians, everyone faced the same choice. Cooperation was rewarded instantly. Resistance was punished publicly. At first it worked. Fear moved faster than law ever could. Court cases collapsed. Arrest warrants vanished. Witnesses recanted. The state hesitated, calculating costs Escobar was willing to pay without limit. Violence became his enforcement mechanism, replacing institutions with intimidation. For a time, terror functioned as governance, but terror has a shelf life. The more Escobar escalated, the less room he left for ambiguity. Bombings followed assassination. Assassinations followed threats. Planes exploded. Public spaces turned into targets. What had begun as selective violence metastasized into national trauma. And instead of paralyzing Colombia forever, it did something Escobar never intended. It unified it. The violence stopped being a negotiation tactic and became an existential threat. Political rivals aligned. Institutions hardened. Public opinion shifted decisively. Fear gave way to resolve. Escobar didn't intimidate the system into surrender. He taught it that coexistence was impossible. Once that lesson was learned, the rules changed. The state no longer asked whether confrontation was worth the cost. It decided the cost of not confronting him was higher. Every bomb narrowed his option. Every killing reduced potential allies. Terror, once his greatest weapon, became the proof that he could never be accommodated. Violence can force compliance, but only briefly. When used as a governing strategy, it eventually clarifies one thing beyond doubt, that only one side can survive. And by choosing terror over restraint, Escobar ensured the state would choose annihilation over compromise. The Medellín Cartel wasn't a network, it was a kingdom, and like any kingdom, it revolved around a single ruler. Pablo Escobar didn't delegate power, he absorbed it. Strategic decisions flowed upward to him and back down again. He controlled routes, prices, alliances, and punishments personally. Nothing important moved without his approval. He didn't just command wealth, he held it. Escobar famously kept cash physically close, stored in warehouses, safe houses, and rural hideouts. Money wasn't abstract or digital, it was tangible, counted, guarded, and loyal to him alone. That physical control reinforced something deeper. He was the emotional center of gravity. Loyalty wasn't to the cartel as an institution, it was to Escobar the man. Fear, admiration, and dependence all pointed in one direction. That structure made him extraordinarily powerful. Decisions were fast, discipline was absolute. Rivals couldn't fracture the organization because there were no independent factions to peel away. But it also made the entire empire fragile. When intelligence agencies turned their focus on destroying Medellín, they didn't face a decentralized web of semi-autonomous cells. They didn't need to dismantle dozens of leaders, financiers, and logistics hubs. They only needed to locate one man. Every safe house mattered because Escobar used them. Every phone call mattered because he made them. Every mistake echoed through the entire system. Centralization meant efficiency, but it also meant total dependency. When Escobar moved, the cartel moved. When he hid, it hid. When he panicked, the empire panicked with him. In the end, Medellín wasn't defeated by cutting supply lines or bankrupting its operation. It was defeated by isolating its brain. Once Escobar was cornered, there was no institutional resilience left to absorb the shock. A kingdom with one ruler rises fast, but when that ruler falls, everything falls with him. In 1991, Pablo Escobar did something no criminal was supposed to be able to do. He negotiated his own surrender. The deal was unprecedented. In exchange for turning himself in, Escobar would be imprisoned on his own terms in a facility he helped design. That place was La Catedral, a custom-built prison perched on a hillside overlooking Medellín. Officially, it was incarceration. In reality, it was a fortified residence. La Catedral had a soccer field, a bar, telephones, and most importantly, armed guards who were loyal not to the state, but to Escobar himself. From inside La Catedral, Escobar continued to run parts of his operation. Visitors came and went, orders were issued, punishments were carried out. The walls existed, but authority did not cross them. This arrangement exposed an uncomfortable truth. Escobar wasn't just a criminal negotiating leniency, he was openly humiliating the state of Colombia. The prison wasn't a concession. It was a public demonstration of who still held power. And humiliation invites escalation. As pressure mounted, the government attempted to reassert control by transferring Escobar to a real prison. That moment shattered the illusion of compromise. Before the transfer could happen, Escobar escaped. That single act changed everything. Negotiation ended. Deals collapsed. Any remaining belief that Escobar could be contained gave way to certainty that he could not coexist with the state under any circumstances. From that point forward, the conflict stopped being about managing violence. It became about ending it, completely. When Escobar walked out of La Catedral, he didn't just flee custody, he closed the door on compromise. From that moment on, the war became total, not because the state wanted it, but because it had finally accepted that there was no other option. Pablo Escobar was not brought down by law enforcement alone. By the early 1990s, the fight against him had crossed a line, quietly, deliberately. What finished Escobar wasn't just the police or the military, but a shadow organization known as Los Peppers, people persecuted by Pablo Escobar. Los Peppers were not an official force. They didn't wear uniforms or operate under warrants. They functioned in the gray space where legality had already collapsed. Their targets were precise and ruthless. They went after Escobar's lawyers, eliminating the people who shielded him legally. They burned his properties, stripping him of safe havens and symbols of power. They killed his financiers, cutting off cash flows that had once seemed endless, and they systematically dismantled the protection around his family, leaving him isolated, exposed, and constantly on the move. Los Peppers weren't legal, they weren't clean, they were effective. This was the turning point. The moment the state stopped pretending the conflict was about law enforcement, due process, or arrest. Officially, nothing had changed. Unofficially, everything had. Intelligence flowed in one direction, targets overlapped, pressure mounted from all sides at once. Escobar's world began shrinking faster than he could adapt. What Los Peppers represented, wasn't justice, it was eradication, a recognition that Escobar could not be contained, reformed, or negotiated with. He had to be removed entirely, along with the ecosystem that sustained him. In Colombia, the rules bent because the alternative felt impossible. The state didn't endorse Los Pepes publicly, but it didn't stop them either. Silence became consent. Distance became strategy. This wasn't victory through law. It was victory through exhaustion, terror, and attrition. And once that path was chosen, there was no return. Escobar's downfall was no longer about arresting a criminal. It was about eliminating a symbol and accepting the moral cost of doing so. Pablo Escobar believed fear could overpower everything, institutions, resolve, even technology. He assumed terror would blind the system, slow it down, force it to retreat. That belief had carried him far. It was also wrong. By the final phase of the war, the hunt for Escobar had shifted. The Colombian search bloc, backed by US intelligence, stopped chasing rumors, informants, and public tips. They focused on something Escobar couldn't intimidate: signals. Every phone call mattered. Every transmission narrowed the net. Direction-finding equipment didn't care who Escobar was or how feared he'd been. It only cared where the signal came from and how long it stayed on the air. Violence couldn't scare radio waves into silence. Escobar tried to adapt. He moved constantly. He shortened calls. He changed location, but the system only needed seconds, and Escobar had a problem no security protocol could solve. He needed to speak. His empire had been built on fear, but his final days were shaped by something else: attachment. He kept calling his family, checking in, reassuring, listening. That need, that last human weakness, became his undoing. Each call tightened the circle. Each conversation traded secrecy for connection. In the end, the contrast was absolute. The man who bombed cities, assassinated officials, and terrorized a nation was defeated not by a bigger explosion, but by triangulation, not by panic, but by patience. Terror can dominate streets, but it can't defeat systems. Escobar believed violence could substitute for invisibility. Surveillance proved the opposite. Once the hunt became technical instead of psychological, the outcome was inevitable. The most feared man in Colombia wasn't cornered by an army. He was located, quietly, precisely, by radio waves. By late 1993, his lieutenants were dead or defected. His money was inaccessible. His protection network collapsed. Escobar wasn't overpowered. He was isolated. When he died on that rooftop, Medellín didn't celebrate justice. It exhaled. Escobar's death was framed as a victory. It wasn't. Cocaine didn't disappear. Routes didn't close. Demand didn't drop. What changed was management. After Medellín collapsed, power shifted to groups like the Cali Cartel. They learned from Escobar's mistakes. They avoided public attention, bribed quietly instead of bombing loudly, decentralized operation, integrated into legitimate business. No kingpins, no headlines, no wars, just spreadsheets. Escobar ran an empire. His successors ran systems. Modern trafficking is fragmented, transnational, financialized. Violence still exists, but it's localized, outsourced, and deniable. The world didn't defeat drug trafficking. It optimized it. Pablo Escobar failed because he misunderstood power. Power that seeks visibility invites resistance. Power that seeks legitimacy exposes itself. Power that centralizes creates a single point of failure. Escobar wanted to be a symbol. The system that replaced him wanted to be invisible. That's why Escobar is remembered, and his successors are not. And that may be the most unsettling legacy of all. The man who terrified a nation was replaced by structures that don't need to.